frustrating that it wasn't as swift as you might have wanted. But ultimately, you got good care when you did get the right care. Does anyone have any particular questions that they would like to pose at this point?
Thank you both for sharing. I'm Caroline, one of the associate head. I think your story about going and speaking to somebody and not really feeling heard and understood, it's not really something that most of us can recognise. But I'm really interested in the doctor that you spoke to, where you did feel that you had a different experience. Could you say a little bit more about what were the things there that really helped?
I said he was I think he was the honorary consultant at King's, and he didn't just look at my shoulder, because I was saying that my shoulder wasn't working, but actually he took quite a lot of time checking out my eyes and the reaction in my eyes. He did lots of tests, both on my arm, my hand, but also my legs as well. He did a thorough check, rather than just going, well, you're telling me it's your arm, there's nothing wrong with your arm apart from that. So it just felt like he spent a lot. I mean, it said it was a good 45 minutes. I was a bit apologetic for the people behind me. But yeah, he was just very thorough. And he didn't just go with what I was presenting, but checked other things as well. So yeah, I think that's what made the difference. So
I wonder whether so how was it that you came to be seen by a doctor? And you might not know the answer to this, it might be internally, but how come when you went to King George's you were seen by a doctor? Had you been seen by a doctor?
Yeah,
at Queen's as well?
I've been seen by doctors both times, having gone through the process here. One of them I felt wasn't particularly helpful. I'm not going to describe him because you might work out who he is, but one of them I think he was on duty for A&E, and he just ticked some boxes and said no, and sent me packing really. The other time I'd spent probably 10 hours with A&E, and eventually got to see, I think he was probably a junior doctor, who had said, well, you can't see anything on the CT scan, so therefore we think it's just a trapped nerve. So there wasn't anything else in depth.
Yeah.
So yeah, but no, I had been seen by the doctor, but they hadn't picked up on all the symptoms. So.
And when you went to King George, they knew that you'd already had 2 prior visits to Queen.
I told them.
Yeah.
Yes. So,
I'm Anthony, I'm the chief medical officer. I think it's an example where an experienced clinician who grew up without recourse on every occasion to a CT scan or an MRI has done a really thorough examination, and just an example of very good medicine. And perhaps what's happening is our younger doctors have got so used to having scans to help them that when the scan doesn't show anything, they scan more emphasis than they would to their own clinical findings on an examination. And you had what sounds like a classical detailed neurological examination that we were taught to do, we used to do very frequently. I suspect now quite often they just simply CT scans, don't do the thorough examination perhaps as they should, other than when they're practicing for their medical examinations, for their membership of Royal College of Physicians. Once they finish with that, they go back and scan again. And that's, we need to educate them more.
And I also asked, on any of the 3 occasions prior to coming into A&E, have you been to try and see your GP about it?
Yeah, I'd seen my GP twice, and then the second time he called a colleague in, and both of them said, "You're having a stroke, go to Queen's."
Did you tell them at Queen's that your GP thought that?
Yeah. So yeah. So
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thankfully, it was a happy outcome. And
it's fairly happy.
apart from the golf being somewhat
missing my golf, but I'm learning to do other things. So
yeah. And you're very positive in your attitude.
Oh yeah,
which is
still alive. That's always a blessing.
It is. It is. Thank you so much for coming and sharing. Is there anything from the stroke team that it's worth sharing?
No, obviously it's nice to hear that we did okay in the end. It would have been better, obviously, if we'd have got a bit sooner, got wheels moving. And that's the whole point of the CNS team and asking the stroke experts as such to go down when patients arrive to A&E so that they can support in cases like this, and they might be able to pick up on the different abnormalities that maybe not have been seen on the scan.
Yeah. It sounds like the care you received when you got up there was
Yeah.
sort of Mitch's oil.
Emphasise again, the stroke lessons, Liz and Samantha, the physio team, really good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I just ask one follow-up question?
Yes.
Jacqueline, the comments you've just made about being called, asked to come to A&E to support the examination happening. Are you seeing, I mean, what's your experience in terms of the frequency in which that's happening? Is it improving? What do you feel about that?
So yes, it is improving. So any patient that walks through that's being triaged with potential stroke symptoms, whether that be from A&E or directly from ambulance, because we're using or we're trying to start using the CVAS system. It's a video triage. So we're doing basically FaceTime with the patient and the paramedics before the patient's, as soon as the patient is showing any sort of fast positive signs. And then from that, we're getting that sort of exposure to the patient that much sooner, which is then giving them the exposure to the experts regarding nursing care. And then from there, that's when the CNS team come down to A&E and review the patient. And obviously they're a little bit more of a than some of the doctors with the stroke symptoms and the random little side effects and different bits and pieces. And that's where they get involved at a sooner point.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing. Oh, so sorry. Please.
Is the stroke team available 24/7 to
24/7.
support? To support
Stroke
the-
CNSs. At the moment, we've got 2 on the day and one on the night time, but we're trying to increase that.
That's only here, not in George.
No, so yeah, stroke, any potential stroke calls come through to Queen's, not.
That's
Sorry for missing your hand, Ron.
to Ron, just so correct me if I'm wrong, but that wouldn't necessarily make the diagnosis better because you need an experienced physician there or what, so you need one of the neurologists or stroke physicians to
Yes.
see them, wouldn't it?
Yes,
Rather
yes.
than
Yes,
And that's whether it's so dependent on the doctor that sees the patient.
yeah, obviously the doctor needs to make a diagnosis.
Okay.
Thank you very much indeed for coming, and Jacqueline, thank you also for the support. Thank you for sharing that experience. It's really helpful for us.
Am I dismissed?
You are, yes, you're free to go. So I just need to, as we move on, the next item is just to check any declarations of interest that we need to ask you to set out when we get to item 8. But other than that, are there any declarations that anyone needs to share? No? Okay, in which case we're on to the minutes from the previous meeting, which was in January. So I have to rely on all of you as to whether there might be any comments or corrections for the minutes, or whether you are ready. Anything we need to tweak?
So they can't see or hear.
Oh, they can't see or hear. Okay.
That's all. Probably fine. Maybe if we go further on. Please scroll down.
Let's see.
So we can hear you and see you. I don't know why we were turned off on the screen, but we've all turned our cameras and our mics off because I don't want to cough at you, but we can hear fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for confirming that. Right. So subject. Yes, I don't have any comments on the minutes. Are we happy to approve? Yes. Brilliant. Thank you very much. And matters arising, we don't have any that require attention at the moment. And action tracker, there's a few, but nothing for today. But we have an open up item, so we're looking to plan a session on productivity, which will be interesting for the 5th of June. And then there's a closed item for the Audit and Assurance and Risk Assurance Committee rather. That has been closed. So are we happy to approve the status of our action tracker? Oh, the boobs left. I was actually going to say we're not. It's a little bit quick off the mark. I'm actually not going to do that item yet because Matthew's not here. We're going to move on and wait till Matthew. Can I tell him? Yes, I did say it. No.
Okay.
Because it's no, we're not approving, we're confirming in relation to your extension, whereas there's one element we have to approve. Sorry, you're a bit rapid. I'm actually going to change the order. And we're going to wait and do items 8 and 9 once Matthew has arrived. So that might be more.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So in which case, if everyone's happy, and move us on to item 10, which is the Quality Assurance Committee report. Hilary.
I'm just trying to access.
I know navigating the papers isn't straightforward. It's a big pack.
Yeah. So I think it's fair to say, I mentioned it before, we had quite a lot of material to cover and a lot of presentations. And I think probably the main insight from that in terms of the committee itself is that we need to ask the people who are coming to assume that we've read the papers. I mean, there's quite a lot of business that QAC covers anyway, that comes regularly, and you can see that from the kind of the trackers of different meetings. And so, I'm quite happy that we have good oversight and good assurance given the sheer scale of the things we cover. But I think we have an issue about not overwhelming people with being talked at. I see nods from Ruth and the other committee members, and actually enough time to get into detail. So we're kind of having a bit of a review about how we take business and how we also perhaps coach people who come into the committee, not to just rehash what's in the paper, but actually to give us their kind of highlights and enable committee members, because we slightly ran over time and I spent most of my time anxious about running it behind. So it wasn't the best committee, but I think there was some good learning from that result. I think the important points to make really are, and we cover some of them elsewhere in the agenda. Maternity is a continuous area, but clearly, we look at all the 10 CNST areas, but it's always an area of focus. I think it's always an area that the committee is interested in. The deep dives, I think, are really helpful. It gives us an idea, insights into different areas. And since Andrew's appointment, we started to look at areas that we want to focus on where we think we're not performing as well. Diabetes, which will come up this afternoon in the private area, is perhaps one of those where there's an opportunity to approach it more effectively and start to improve outcomes. Really. But overall, I think it is as on the paper, really nothing else to escalate at the moment. The other thing I would say is that there's a continuing tightening of where we're at in relation to the board assurance framework and QAC, and that's continuing to evolve, which is great. We've got this session coming up later in the year, not that far away now, and I think triangulating the role of QAC in relation to other board committees, but also in relation to gaining assurance and understanding those risks. And I think that's really healthy. But I don't know if Andrew or Catherine want to add anything to that, from your perspective.
It does cover a lot of information. It does. Could I ask a couple of questions, if I may? So on item 4.2, there's talk there about PSERF training and in-house training, and also specifically mention of training for non-execs. I'm just wondering if progress has been made or whether any of that in-house training has started and what's happening on the NED training.
So PSERF, I think since I joined 8 weeks ago, there's been quite an interesting discussion because it's obviously a bit of a sea change. It's this kind of new departure for the NHS, which I think enables us to focus much more on areas of concern rather than simply spend time on ticking a box and saying, well, we've done a report, we've looked at this and everything's okay. So we focus on the areas that I'm not yet aware of PSERF training for NED, but I'm assuming that is going to be rolled out and we should all be signing up to it, because from a unitary board perspective, I think it'd be really important for us all to have a kind of picture understanding of it.
So there's more in-house training because it's so time consuming. The number of PSERVs that an individual take on is quite small. So we're trying to get more of our colleagues trained up so they can run a PSERV. And then I think there would be a slightly different nuance to the training for a NED to understand what we're doing and be involved when necessary. The problem with PSERV is great. I think it's a really good way forward. I had a conversation yesterday with the coroner. Coroners do not like PSERV. They like the way we used to investigate incidents and do a root cause analysis, because that fits so much better with what they want to know as a coroner. So it's causing a bit of friction with our coroner, and he says it's similar elsewhere in the country, just so people are aware. I think it's a right way forward, but it's increasing our workload, and we also have to go and effectively do a root cause analysis when something's going to the coroner.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for Hilary?
I would endorse that, because I know that's an awareness of parts as well, that actually coroners, and some coroners in particular, have found the adjustment to PSERV quite difficult.
Yeah.
From the patient's perspective, the PSERV is a massive leap forward, and the amount of involvement that the patients and patient reps have within the process now is there's no comparison to where we were. So I think the problem is that when we're talking about the coroner input, and I know obviously a lot of stuff does go to the coroner, but what we aim to do with PSERV is to try and pick things up before we end up in the coroner's court, so we can actually avoid things when we see near misses happening, and treat them with the same gravitas that we do if something does go wrong. It does in the affair result. But from the patient's point of view, we wholeheartedly endorse the PSERV, and I think it's fair to say that we put our shoulder behind it as well.
It's very good to hear, Ron. Thank you. Important.
Thank you. Shall we move on then? So I think we're going over to Catherine on the reports, safe staffing, infection prevention control.
Thank you. So the nursing and midwifery safe staffing review was considered at CRAC. There were a couple of things that I'd just like to bring to people's attention, please. Firstly, this is our 6 monthly reports, and we're used to receiving those. And it's pleasing to see that for the third report in a row, we don't need it. We're not asking for an increase in the nursing numbers, but we are asking that within the group they move some nurses between groups so that we can make sure the staff. One of the key areas in terms of our agency costs, because we use hardly any agency, is the RMNs, but we've taken a take through recruiting our own RMNs. So we'll have our own team that will be much better now. Our staff does understand our processes, and I think that that's absolutely the right way. We've done some good domestic recruitment. We've had a couple of big weekend recruitment drives. We've had a lot of our student nurses apply, and student nurses who have been trained in other organisations, and we have filled all of our band 5 posts for September. In fact, we had more people apply than we had posts for. We've also recruited some individuals who've got been specifically trained in learning disabilities, because we know we have an increasing number of patients who present. If you look at our peer numbers, we're about right for our peers in terms of the number of nurses that we have, and our care hours per day are about right. In terms of maternity, we agreed at an increased funding based on the Birth Rate Plus process, and that recruitment is underway, and in a couple of times our vacancy level will be down to 7%, which is really low for midwives, so we're very pleased. And we recognise the financial position, so we are working to AMBER based on acuity and dependency. So we're making sure that we've got the right number of nurses on board, depending on the acuity and dependency of the patients. And that also takes into consideration if there are additional patients on the board, reflects those numbers up. And team-based fostering is being piloted at the moment, and if it's successful, I suspect it will be rolled out across the organisation.
Thank you.
The birth rate plus, that's going down to 1 in 20.
Yeah.
Have we got an idea of forward view of, is it going to stick at that? Because this is a big change, isn't it? Because 1 in 24 before. Is that expected to now stick for X period of time? And can we forecast some of what we expect our birth rate to be over the next? And it's difficult because women just get pregnant when they want to get pregnant, but there are trends, isn't
Yeah,
there?
that's right. So I think it's a good question, and I'm going to answer it slightly differently. There are lots of concerns about birth rate plus as a tool. So there's going to be some work done nationally looking at whether birth rate plus is the correct tool to use, or whether there is a better, more evidence-based tool for identifying midwives that you need. I think if we look and we talk to midwives now, they feel much happier about the numbers of midwives that are on duty. Of course, they'll always want more, but they're happy and they're reporting that there are more midwives on duty. So I think that for the type of patients that we have at the moment, we're adhering to birth rate, but we're also listening to our midwives in that front. I think probably the acuity and dependency of our patients will change. We probably will have an increase in the number of cesareans, but that will require a different skill mix to look after those individuals.
Thank you.
Martin.
Yeah, just to pick up the last thing that you said, Catherine, which wouldn't surprise you to hear I'm a little bit concerned about. If the forward look is that we're expecting the number of cesareans to increase, we already know that we've got a pressure with respect to providing sufficient theatre space for to plan cesareans. So and we know what posts we're looking at for next financial year. So how do we square the circle? And how do we...
Fiona's got a plan.
Okay.
Two-part plan. So part one is so first of all, looking utilisation of caesarean theatres. So it doesn't necessarily work as efficiently, let's use that word, efficiently in terms of turnaround of cases. It's not booked like that, and the caseload is slightly different. So there is additional activity to be gained by using the theatres we've got more efficiently. The second part of that is we agreed at IRG a few months ago to extend the day, the theatre time day of an elective caesarean theatre opening into twilight. So you can book 2 or 3 more cases a day into a longer day. And that's what we do in all the other theatres. We generally use the physical assets we've got more rather than think about what we do in addition. Now, we have scoped or looked at the cost of trying to create another theatre within the Queen's theatre infrastructure. And I have to say that that's an extremely difficult thing to do in a PFI that's purpose-built, purpose-designed to not have a theatre in that space. So the better way of achieving more theatre time, more theatre space for caesareans is, first of all, to assess what benefit using the time more efficiently in the twilight does in terms of mitigating or expanding the opportunity in terms of activity. And then the slightly more medium term. So the direction of travel from Queen's for elective surgery has got to be that we do more at King George's. So we move elective surgery off this site, which fundamentally is a big acute surgical unit and a tertiary surgical unit. And so as soon as we can move some services back to King George's, we create theatre space here, and the first theatre we free up here will then go to the maternity unit to have as an extra theatre. So there's a number of moving parts on that, Marta, but most importantly, using the space they've already got effectively is key to this.
Timescales?
So point 1 and point 2 is already in place, and we will, through the IRG process, we will evaluate the investment we've made into that way of working and see what it's doing in terms of efficiency and expanding the activity. I think there are a number of things in motion around what we can do at King George's, whether we can expand the footprint of surgery there and whether we can do more work at King George's, which probably won't go into now, but very happy to talk about, in other forums. And that could be a relatively quick process, or it could take a bit longer. I suppose the thing to remember about opening another theatre for maternity is that, albeit we are responding to a risk and a risk around, planning caesareans, we will have to staff that theatre. We will have to invest in those staff and workforce infrastructures to deliver that care. So physical space is one part of this, and the second element of that will be gaining the investment from whichever part of the system we need to gain the investment from in order to deliver an expanded maternity offering. Thanks.
Shall we go on? Should we finish this section, then we'll go back and do? Yeah. So infection prevention control.
This was also considered at the end of this thing. And there are just a couple of things I'd like to bring to people's attention. Firstly, we had 2 MRSAs actually this last year, and that's very unusual. So we've obviously done some work around that. And that COVID and flu continue to have an impact over the winter period with beds, and we had to be very innovative about how we used our beds, that sort of thing. But the really positive thing is we've got respiratory point of care testing in ED, which means that we know much quicker what's the matter with people who can go to the right place.
Thank you. Any comments on that report? Thank you. Should we then do the integrated quality and safety report, which is the month 10 report?
Okay. This is the in fact, also went through this report. A couple of key areas to note. We've previously highlighted some risks associated with the Ulysses system, though that continues to be an issue, but we now have a plan on how we're going to resolve that, which is very positive. Maternity have highlighted the lack of end-to-end digital system, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit later on, but we need to have that, and it is part of the ongoing digital process, and we should have a revised tender process completed by mid-quarter. We had a significant spike in the increase in reported incidents within January, but it's within our normal range. It was just a spike at that particular time. And we obviously opened Frailty ESTEC, but Fiona, I'm sure we'll talk about that later in her report. And that has made an impact on the quality of care for that group of individuals. Other than that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Any particular questions on this one? Had a good going over and checking whether I had anything on it. I don't think I had. Okay. Okay, thank you. Right, well, in which case we might go back and we will now ask Mahbub to step out briefly for item 8, and then I'll bring you back in a minute, Mahbub. Navigating these documents. So first of all, the trust board membership, 2 items to report and get confirmation, one for information, one for approval. So for information, we have been successful in extending for a second term both Mahbub and Marta as non-exec directors, which is jolly good news, both for a further period of 3 years. And also looking to, which is a separate issue for us internally, to confirm for Mahbub to continue as vice chair for the term of his reappointment, so for the next 3 years, also the next term, and that is an item that does require to be approved, hence asking to step out that item. So just need to check that the board is comfortable with the decision to approve him to continue as our vice chair. Lovely, thank you. Right, we can bring him back in. Okay. In terms of briefly, in terms of updates, obviously a month in now, and has been a whistle stop in terms of getting to meet and getting to see lots of people. I seem to have been all over the place, which is fabulous, learning fast. Really good welcomes everywhere, had an excellent visit over to King George Hospital, having done some site visits, ward visits here in my first week. I had a really full day at King George, which was fantastic, and met lots of different teams. Also got a really good sense of some of the challenges, particularly the mental health challenges that we're feeling in both our A&E and on some of the wards where there were some particularly difficult patients being cared for, not necessarily in the right setting. So that's been really useful. Also had a couple of ICB sessions, so an ICP development session and then an ICB or development session. I'm not sure anything significant was necessarily agreed or achieved in those, other than getting to know lots of people and some really interesting conversations around where next and what we need to do. So interesting on the direction of travel. The other chairs within the system are arriving. So Ian Jacobs, who's new chair at Bart, started this week, and Mary Elford, who's going to be the new chair at Homerton, has been attending a few meetings. So we all went out on Monday evening with Marie, Gabriel, and also Eileen Taylor from NELF. So just interesting to get a sense of the new chair group and how that is going to operate. Some quite blunt information from Marie in terms of the financial pressures that I know we will come on to, but also some enthusiastic support for where we will go next with the APC. So I think an opportunity perhaps for 3 new chairs to give a little bit of thought to where that goes next. So that's quite interesting, and we'll look forward to Mary starting next month formally, but she's definitely getting involved. So I don't think there's anything else specific to raise from what I'm seeing at the minute, other than those key areas, but very happy to take any questions if there are any as to what I've been up to so far. In which case, let's hand over to Matthew.
Hello there, thank you, Chair. So usual report for me, some good news there about research. I think the neuro project we've talked about, I think what private boards come through now, and also an announcement about the Commercial Research Delivery Centre for North East London, which we're hoping will see BHRET really increasing its participation in clinical trials over the course of the next few years. And I think the £6.5 million trial, which is our largest yet, is a great way to get up the battle for that. Lovely piece in there about our apprenticeship programme, which is now in its 7th year. And we had a fantastic event at the House of Commons to celebrate it with the Secretary of State kindly dropped in alongside Jackie Smith, who was our former chair, now of course Minister in Education. And the feedback from the apprentices was fantastic, actually, and from the managers about the role of playing. And delighted to say, I mentioned in my report, the Ofsted report, we've actually had it in today. It's a good across the board, which for a first inspection report is really, really impressive, actually. And the content of the report is well worth a read. I think Ofsted are publishing it next week. It's a real testament to the people involved in the programme that we've had such a high calibre report, both in terms of the quality of the training and education we're providing, but also the experience of the apprentices who are with us as well. And with more than 400 of our staff now working their way through the programme, we can only see that growing actually. And it's a fantastic demonstration of how we can play our role both as an employer as well as delivering value for money for us as the organisation, and it's a service we soon hope to be able to offer to other NHS trusts. So great to be regulated by Ofsted as well as CQC now, and I'm very happy with this one. Thank you. Some other bits, obviously Secretary of State was very positive about the apprenticeship programme. He's also made some very clear messages about what the expectations are of the NHS over the next couple of years. And I think we can see it right across the public sector. Actually, we can see what local authorities are facing with their budgets as well. But you know, with the NHS having for a number of years now been running with a fairly substantial deficit, in some cases a fairly substantial structural deficit, and the expectation is over the next couple of years we work really hard to get back within a balanced budgetary position, and that is going to mean doing more to cut costs than we previously had to. So for scale, really the last couple of years we've managed to deliver around a £30 million savings programme, and next year we'll be looking at having to deliver north of £50 million worth of savings to still finish the year with a £50 million deficit. And that is going to involve us doing more than continuing to tighten belts in places as well. It's going to think differently about where we spend our money, where we invest our money. Part of it will be about reducing our use of temporary staff, which is around £90 million cost still. But it will also be looking at how much of our current headcount we can maintain. Because I think we've tried to do the kind of more for less for years. This is about less for less in some instances as well. So some of the decisions that are going to have to come to this board and through other be about where we can effectively restrict access to certain services in a way that we think will cause the least harm as an outcome. But the consequence of that over the course of the next few years will be to get back within a sustainable budget. We can see areas where we can save money. There is waste within the organisation, and there is the opportunity to improve productivity. And we've been sent some very helpful and interesting packs from NHS England that show for every trust in the country where there are opportunities based on benchmarking and flow to try to take costs out. So we've got a really strong focus on that, and we're doing it through the clinical process and trying to make it as much of a bottom-up process as possible, recognising these are the kind of areas where you can get some really tough discussions between clinicians and non-clinical executives if you don't have the conversations in an open and transparent way. But it's going to be a very, very hard year. I think I can't remember having to do a savings programme of this scale in my time in the NHS, and I think it's taken us into quite radically new territory. We'll be able to say some positive stuff about the planning round and performance in that context later on, but the money's looking brutal, to be quite honest. We've mentioned in there the campaign to get a new A&E at Queen's. People will be aware we've invested heavily in King George over the last few years. They have a brand new A&E, refurbished acute medical unit, and a really good front door setup actually, which makes sense. It looks good. There's clear lines to say Queen's is an awfully badly designed A&E, which is poor for patients and staff, and we're campaigning hard to get support for that. A number of conversations underway to try to find money, recognising that the current capital system in the NHS would not allow the kind of investment that we need for Queen's. So I think there's been some positive comments made recently by Amanda Pritchard and by others about the NHS looking at different ways to get capital and investment in. I suspect we'll have to look at some form of private scheme for this. I think we need to be quite comfortable about that and think about how we do that in the best way to deliver benefits for our patients. And thanks to the hundreds and hundreds of people who've contacted our MPs, and thanks to our MPs for across parties for working to support us in this. They know from their constituency postbag how important it is. And there's an update in the urgent emergency care. Busiest January on record. A bit of a spoiler is that February was even busier. February's our busiest month ever for daily attendances at A&E. So despite the best efforts of partners in the community and elsewhere, we continue to see record attendances at our emergency departments, and nothing is shifting that at the minute. That continues to put huge pressure on the front of the hospital. And there's also mentioned in the pack some of the considerable risk that we're carrying around patients with mental health needs. King George in particular continues to be one of the largest receivers of Section 136 patients in London, despite not being a designated mental health unit. And we've had a couple of incidents in the last few weeks of knives being found on patients in the department, serious investment in security involved to try to keep patients safe. We have had an assault reported on a patient now as a result as well of the mixed waiting areas that we're having to run with some really quite distressed patients in the space of physical health patients who are waiting for their care. I think it's probably the highest risk we have of a serious incident as a trust at the minute. And I think at times we are riding our luck day by day, trying to make sure that we keep patients safe. And I don't like to use the expression lucky in the context of managing a hospital. I think we are fortunate that we've not had a more serious incident, and we've had a few very near misses. Waiting lists, we're currently, I think, the best performing acute in London for waiting lists, which is a fantastic place to be, pushing really hard to get those waiting times down. And we've reduced the number of year-long waiters. I think since the junior doctors' strikes stopped, we've shown what we're able to do here. And we're very confident going into next year that we'll be able to deliver on the Secretary of State and Prime Minister's ambitions around waiting lists. Even with the pressure, I think, on some of the weekend working, which we won't be able to do in the way that we have been able to do because of the elective recovery plan. But there's many areas to go after, bearing in mind more than 9 out of 10 people on our waiting list are waiting for outpatient appointments. Our surgical colleagues and our colleagues in specialty medicine continue to do the sort of sprints to try to get the wait times down. As mentioned, of the gallbladder patients taken off the list in one day. Some really good push has been seen right across the medical specialties and surgical specialties to get people access to the care they need. And cancer, we're meeting all the key cancer targets in December, which is good to know. A new diagnostic capacity in place, and we're trying to get those CDCs really humming in the right way. It is worth saying, noting that we're doing really well on diagnostics and on waiting lists, that we are introducing the electronic patient record this year. Other services in London that have done this recently have faced some really significant problems as a consequence of their EPR rollout. So we are being very, very careful. We'll hear a lot more from David and the team about this over the course of public and private board today. one of the things we need to be conscious of is this is the year where more than anything we're being asked to improve productivity and performance. We're doing a thing that in every other trust where it's ever happened has reduced productivity and performance. We shall see how we can best mitigate that as we work through the year and try and save 50 million. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions before I? Yes.
I have a couple of questions. It strikes me that you have to deal with so much that is currently beyond your control. You're receiving these things. And two things struck me in particular with the section 136 patients. You can't help but feel, is there a different way where people, those patients would automatically go next door, even if we were loaning out a doctor, so they're not on the premises. Once they're here, and that is part of the issue, moving on in that way. And my other thought was something that Janine was saying around with the temporary staffing. That's something at NHS England level. If, for example, there were some different parameters around the use of rates of agency doctors, where else would people go? Because currently, as we were talking in ESTEC, you've got your agency doctor. If we don't employ them, they can go somewhere else. They're doing things differently on that kind of level. I don't know how practical either of those are, but in the spirit of thinking differently, because these wicked problems we do have.
Yeah, I mean, on the agency doctors, I think we've hugely cut our agency spend over the last few years, but we do still struggle in some of the agency roles. There certainly could be a concerted effort around that, and the problem we have, it's legitimate for people who are working for an agency to go where the rates are, and we are in a position where actually, because of our proximity to Essex, to other systems around the M25, people can make decisions about where they want to work. So there is a bit of a buyer's market. I think we've done a lot of work within North East London to try to address that. And there's probably more we can still do, particularly working with colleagues at bars to try to avoid the kind of internal competition for this. I think some of this would be amenable to a different national approach to that. And there's been some pretty clear statements about trying to drive use a high-cost agency out of the NHS, and I think that would be a good idea. And I think we've reduced our spend from, was it 47 million to about 18 over the last 2 to 3 years, which is really great actually in terms of the savings that we've made from that, but there's certainly more to go. There is a role for very short-term requirements for specialist staff at short notice, and I think while the market's there, people will continue to make the best out of it, but I'd rather pay the money to substantive staff and to bank staff than to pay a huge cut of it to an agency. And I think there's something fundamentally unfair about two people side by side doing the same job, and one of them costing the NHS 3 times as much for what we know is probably not as good a service. On the point about section 136, we have tried everything we possibly can around this, and there are models elsewhere in London that cope better with the flows than ours don't, and some of it's the conversation with the police around it as well, and patterns as well. But yeah, and yeah, I don't think there's much more I can personally do about it.
Thank you. In your report, Matthew, you talked about lots of things, and you talked about obviously the improvements that we would like to make to the A&E facilities. But I mean, we had the gentleman there telling us he'd been in A&E twice for 8 hours on occasions. We still have people in A&E for 8, 12, 15 hours in our department waiting to see a doctor. And it almost feels a bit like an elephant in the room that nobody's actually talking about. We all know it's a problem. We all know it's a nationwide problem. It's not just this trust. But I don't actually see anything immediately being done to actually address that. We all know it's a problem. We all know it's there. But your report is silent on it.
So, no, I mean, the long waits are partly a function of how crowded and badly designed it is in there. It's a really inefficient department. And I mean, I don't want to quote another one of the Neds actually, but Ruth, certainly when you've told us that when you've been down there, it takes you around 40 minutes per patient, whereas in your practice it's 15 minutes per patient. That's because of how badly designed and how badly laid out it is, and the systems that don't speak to each other, etc. So the physical environment makes it very hard to see and treat patients and pull them through. There is certainly a lot we are trying to do within the hospital to improve flow through. Things like the same-day emergency care areas. We've opened up the surgical assessment unit area and others to try to pull people through. But the crowding makes it very, very hard to run the service effectively. And I think, I've said before, the department's designed with 325 major patients a day here at Queen's, and often gets over double that as well. And sometimes the staff are literally just trying to keep people that they can see safe, and their ability to manage and control the flows in that is heavily compromised. There's other systems in the country, places like Walsall and others, where they've introduced a new, better designed A&E, and they have seen the flow and the quality of clinical care and patient experience significantly improved. And I think it's lots of it is a function of the really badly designed layout.
I accept that, Matthew, but when we've got people waiting like 12 hours to see a doctor in the A&E, it's really a simple case of we haven't got enough staff there, or the number of patients that turn up.
We have got enough staff.
I mean, forgive me, but it doesn't seem like rocket science. If we've got patients waiting 12 hours to see a doctor, that we haven't got enough doctors to actually see the number of patients that are coming in. But we're not sort of talking about it.
Let's come back. I think Ruth wants to talk about it.
Can I respond to it a bit? I think the way that the gentleman said about his weight, that isn't that he took 10 hours to see a doctor. That was he was in the department for 10 hours. So the targets of kind of in fact, I'd say it's actually unusual for someone not to see someone at least that's going to make a clinical decision. And that doesn't have to always be a doctor. I think we've got to get away from doctor is king. And we're very much seeing that in the community. You could see a first contact physio or paramedic or a dietitian. It's about seeing the right person at the right time to help your pathway. Part of our delays in A&E, I think, is the over-investigations. And that puts a delay on the time that they're here. And it's going to go back to Andrew. If actually the first assessments were done by the right people in the right way, with the right experience, the right setup, it will go better. And what I saw when I was working down there is there were people that I know would have been in there for 6 hours, and yet I got them out in 45 minutes because I was the right person at the right time making the right decision. So I think we've just got to remodel some of that. It's just another point is because I think you've not maybe celebrated it enough. The staff survey results have up more than 14%. I think no matter what that staff survey says, the fact that our staff feel that they want to give feedback and that you're going to listen and respond is a huge culture shift over the last couple of years and really should be celebrated, because I think that's absolutely massive. And then just well done.
I was actually going to say a number of things that Ruth just said, because I don't know if I was in the fortunate position of visiting the department today, and I think I could see the physical challenges on this site that the staff actually have to deliver. But I would agree with Ruth says, it's what we're looking at, I guess, is the overall time that people spend in the department, but within that time they're being seen, they're being sent for tests, and then they've got to wait for results before they see again. So I absolutely get that the overall length of time and the concern, and I'm not looking to downplay the fact that because of the physical challenges we face within that particular department, it makes it much more difficult to actually get a very streamlined process for our patients. I do think, in my sense, is that, having visited that department this morning, the staff are committed, they're very busy. They've got challenges. I witnessed a patient who had to be effectively supervised by 2 security individuals because of their behaviours, and I can actually see the challenges that staff are facing in there. But we get the question you're raising, but I think until we actually get the capital investment to improve the processes we've got there, then it makes it very, very difficult for staff within an organisationally. We're making the best use of the resources we have. We've got thousands at the other end of the process about discharges, and therefore getting people out of there to the ward where it's appropriate. But within what we've got, I think we're doing reasonably well.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time. Mark, did you have your hand up?
I was just going to say, the position in emergency departments across the land is that if you increased the workload year on year by thousands of episodes of care. There is no system in the world that can cope with that. It cannot produce the resilience of all clinical teams in the real time. We're training more doctors than ever. Last year, instead of 8,800, we're over 10,000 new doctors in the NHS. We cannot keep pace with the current demand in the places where the demand is. That's really about also supporting the front line in the community, reconstructing that where it's needed, supporting the people who are working out there and doing what Ruth said, which is to have a multidisciplinary approach to things so people get to the right person as early as possible in the care chain. And in the patient's scenario earlier, Andrew's point's the right one. Doctors of our vintage who look like us would have examined this man very carefully. Younger doctors, the first thing they do is an image, and then they look at the image, and if they don't see anything, they'll say, well, I can't see what the problem is. But we would reverse that chain, care chain, and that's why when he got to see an older doctor, we got a diagnosis. And that this is going to happen because we are very reliant on an investigative chain now in a way that when Andrew and I chained, we were not. We didn't have these things, they were rare. You couldn't, I mean, you could hardly get a scan. So I think the number of episodes of care in this trust and every other one is going up at a rate that is just unsustainable because people don't feel they've got anywhere else to go for a front door when they can't get the services they need locally in the community. So to change that, we have to reconstruct the front line.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just,
Sorry.
no, John, come.
Yeah, I don't want to labour, but I want it raised because I think it's important. And I think it is a bit of an elephant in the room that we kind of skirt around a bit. We don't actually make a full on front foot attack. And I know there's lots of mitigating circumstances such as the diseases that we have. We still have people and they're being told you're waiting to see a doctor and you're waiting there for, and in my own personal case within the last month, waited 15 hours to see the doctor. So that's, that is not good. And I was being told you're waiting to see a doctor. So it's not good. The other thing I would like to say, just sort of to end on really, we have got some really, really fantastic staff down there. They are working absolutely flat out. They're smiling nearly all of the time. They're doing their job as well as they possibly can. And they're as frustrated as we as patients. And I wouldn't want to think in any way that I was criticising the staff who are doing a fantastic job. I just think there's probably not enough of them. Thank you.
Just one quick point, I guess, and it relates to Ruth's point about the doctor isn't always the answer, because actually if that junior doctor had thought about the stroke nurse, I think he might have got his he got it right the first time round because they're very used to dealing with potential strokes. So there's some learning in there. I just had a question, and slightly conscious of having gone around the trauma unit or part of the trauma unit at the Royal London yesterday, which is clearly a quaternary service, but they were feeling the impact of the fact that the Metropolitan Police has had to disinvest on their police on site. So just thinking about the Section 136s, we have, aggressive patients in A&E, patient assaults. Are we seeing an impact from the police being financially stressed? Because I kind of think as we're heading forward, that, all organisations being under financial pressure is going to make things worse.
I think the answer to that is no, we're not seeing a difference because we've always been a high receiver of Section 136 anyway. And I think, we were really talking about money at this stage. The impact we feel, apart from the huge burden of care in places on an ED team that aren't necessarily trained to look after patients with mental health presentations and security issues. There is an ongoing financial spend within this organisation that is related directly to that type of demand. So I don't think much has changed other than it probably gets more expensive as more patients turn up. We as an organisation though have a responsibility if they're on our premises to wrap around as many of those additional services as necessary to keep patients and staff safe. We do that, but we are obviously regularly updating and monitoring that and hoping that we can, as a system, create a much better environment for dealing with these patients at source rather than once they've been to an A&E for a day and a half.
Last word,
I
Andrew, and then
just
we're moving
want
on.
to come back for a moment to Ron's question. That I think we have to admit there are times of day when we haven't got it right, have the right number of doctors rotated for those times of day. That means if it's an emergency overnight, for instance, where you need 3 doctors involved, patients will wait a long time for nights, wait a long time to see a doctor. So I think we should take that on board. And there are things we can do by organising our rotas better to be able to see the patients and not have them waiting unnecessarily for a doctor. And then when the doctors come in the morning, they're all seen within about an hour. And go on.
Thank you. Right, let's move on. We're going to skip forward again to item 13. So the People and Culture Committee, and in Leslie's absence, Caroline has kindly agreed to give us a bit of an update on that. Thank you.
And I'll take this as read. Some things that I did want to particularly highlight were around mandatory training. The committee were really pleased to see this report, and there's clearly some tremendous work that's been done there, and we did gain significant assurance. And it was very clear to us as well that this is very important, not only for patient outcomes, but for the retention of staff as well, which leads into the other point that I really want to mention around the corporate welcome. Interestingly, just on my way to the PCC that day, I was speaking to a couple of members of staff who were saying how great they just recently done it and how great it was. They were really enjoying it. And I think, I wasn't soliciting that kind of feedback, but it was wonderful to really hear. And the final thing I mentioned, because I don't want to steal Janine's thunder here, I think the whole conversation around inequalities, we were talking about it in relation to the Health Assurance Framework, that moving on, it's, a much more nuanced discussion around, what are the tangible impacts that we can make rather than rhetoric. So that was very pleasing. And then it's the usual moaning from me about 3-letter abbreviations and lengths of paper. But apart from that, that's all I can say.
And I think we also need to approve, I think there were some updates to the terms of reference.
Yes.
That we are asked to approve here. So I don't think there's anything controversial, but I can just whiz through them. Specific reference to the trust as an anchor organisation, which is at 3.4. Some updated role titles for membership and regular attendees. That's controversial. Updated declarations of interest paragraph, that should be fine. Updated quorum to include the associate NEDs in the numbers, which is quite helpful in accounting. We've got enough people there. Very good. Reporting mechanisms updated to the standard approach with the other committees. So that's excellent. And then some updated wording on the annual effectiveness evaluation. So hopefully all of those are acceptable, and are we happy to approve?
Yep.
Thank you. Good. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Caroline. Let's move on to the People and Culture Pay Gaps report. I think that's with Janine.
Yeah. So I'm really pleased to be able to share with you our series of pay gaps. I should probably begin first by saying Ramadan Kareem. So we're now in the season of Ramadan as well. So our ethnicity pay gap, if we start there, again, it's a very complex picture in our organisation, and this is where just using the Black, Asian, minority, ethnic grouping in an organisation with our staffing profile isn't particularly helpful. And so you'll see in the report what we do attempt to do is to introduce some of that nuance that Caroline was talking about. So you will see that our pay gap has actually started to fall a little bit, meaning that the gap between Black, Asian, minority, ethnic staff and white staff pay is starting to reduce. Our organisation is perhaps different to what you'd see in other sectors, in that staff from Black, Asian, minority, ethnic background are paid more on a median basis than white staff. But when you bring out some of that nuance, what you'll actually see is that our highest paid groups are now white other, and our lowest paid groups are actually Filipino. And given that over 10% of our staff are from the Philippines. That's an area we need to focus on, and that's really going to be driven by progression. And on the progression point, you'll see that our gender pay gap has also continued to improve, and that's really encouraging for me because we set an ambitious goal in terms of progress on our pay gap of 5% reduction, and we remain on track for that. We've fallen by 1.43% in that. Men are still paid slightly more than women, but that pay gap is falling. For disability, I am quite concerned about what this report is showing us. It actually shows that there's been a 4% increase in our disability pay gap. That means that our staff who've told us that they have a disability are paid less. We're going to be spending more time looking at this and understanding what's driving this. The thing I do want to point out is that we've seen over 3% more of our staff disclose that they have a disability, so that may be one of the elements that's driving our pay gap. We also need to encourage still more staff to disclose, because in our staff survey, about 20% of our staff have told us that they have a disability or a long-term condition, which is in line with what I would expect to see given the ONS profile for the country. So we're now at 7.35%, which is a big improvement. We were at 4% previously, but we've got a long way to go to hit that 20% rate that we'd expect to see.
Thank you. Wenju, if part of the explanation of the increasing gap is because we've got more people declaring, it just highlights there's a greater problem than we thought in terms of not having aligned pay. So we're absolutely right to focus on looking into it. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much for this overview and seeing some good progress. I was wondering around, because since it is International Women's Week celebrations, etc. I can ask a question around recruitment into consultant positions for our females. It's good to see that number of female junior doctors is very good, healthy, more than 50%, and 38% just in the permanent consultant positions. So if you could take us, is there a story behind that about what's happened in the last few years? What are our interventions that have been successful? And what more do we need to do to continue forward on that one to hit the appropriate target?
You want me to respond?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think it's probably going to be a joint answer with me and Andrew, given focusing in on the doctors. I think the big change that we have made in this organisation is the attention we've been paying to the experience of our trainees and our new doctors. We're now an attractive place to work. We've seen real action where people have disclosed misogyny or inappropriate behaviour. We follow through on our promises and our commitments. So we're a more desirable place to work. On a national level, I think there's a national issue in terms of women being underrepresented at more senior roles. And this is a conversation that I know is ongoing regarding increased flexibility. There is an overall national pay gap through the legacy of the what's the award called?
CEX.
Yeah, CEX awards, and so there's a lot of legacy of that pay through. But I think as that Clinical Excellence Awards were stopped 2 years ago, replaced by a national award, and what we're seeing at a national level is that as that gradually trails through, the overall gender pay gap, the doctors will start to decline, because that drove some of the gap.
Yes.
Because you had to be doing additional stuff on top of your day job, which was difficult if you have caring responsibilities. If you're working on a part-time basis, you can't get the exciting research opportunities that would gain you the bigger award. So that's one of the big changes that's going on. Thank you.
I think from a pay gap point of view, that's important. In terms of the number of women compared to men who decide to go into consultant jobs rather than, for instance, doing general practice or accept and do a specialist job rather than go to become a consultant, that's ongoing work, and I think will take some time to go through the system. Now, I think I heard on the radio today, it's the first time there are more doctors more women than men. And training on average to be a consultant takes about 10 years or more. So it will take a while until we get to the point where there should be more women than men as consultants. But I think it'll take even longer because we need to make consultant jobs more attractive to everyone. They're flexible, as Janine said, and allow you to be a carer as well if that's what you choose to do.
Thank you. Hilary.
So I had to declare an interest here as a former recipient of the Clinical Excellence Award. I'm not sure it's quite as transparent and effective as you could say, but reflect.
They're trying.
On the female consultant point, I think everybody's talked about flexibility in working, and I just wonder, given we have cost improvement schemes and we're going to be talking later about financial position, whether there are specialties or areas we should think about annualised hours. Because I certainly know from the work we've been doing with One Fever Trust in the Midlands, increasing numbers of men have annualised hours as well. You know, they want to actually take part in bringing up their children as much as their partners very often. So it's just a thought that might also have an impact in that respect.
So we do have some colleagues who do annualised hours. It's really getting the balance right, so that the system within departments is seen as fair, and that everyone's taking on any amount of responsibility, and that can be quite challenging sometimes. And there are all sorts of ways you can work flexibly, of course. I'm sure you can go through them, but there's many options on there, and we should try and make sure that that's available to consultants as well as others. And job sharing, for instance, so we already have some doctors who are job sharing, and that could be men or women, because people choose to work in different ways than they used to.
Yeah. So just to expand a little bit more, so we've just recently launched our Flex for Life campaign, which and what the screensaver doesn't tell you is we've identified 15 different options for flexible working in this trust that we can support, and that's part of a larger program of work, which, as Andrew's pointed out, aims to make sure that anybody who wants to work flexibly is able to. I've been looking at some really interesting data around the choices that different generations are making, and Generation Y, Generation Z, flexibility is being flagged as one of their number one priorities when thinking about jobs. So we're running ahead of the curve, and we'll be looking to do more.
Right, should we move on? So with you, Janine, for the equality delivery standard and the action.
So the request here is to approve our action plan that will be published on our website. Appendix 2, I believe, is the summary document, which is what we will be looking to publish. This is the second time that we have carried out the EDS 2022 review, and we're seeing very good progress. Overall, we are still at developing, but we're just 5 small percentage points short of achieving. So I'm hopeful that for next year we will be solidly achieving. The main drivers of our progress have been the work that we've been doing around inclusion, our workforce rated quality standard performance, and our workforce disability equality standard performance. Areas that we do need to focus on for the year ahead will be mainly around health inequalities and the role that we can play as an anchor employer to help to close some of the outcome gaps. We will also be properly evaluating the impact of our interventions like the Flex for Life programme to demonstrate that it's having the progress that we expect it to in ensuring there's equity of experience, equity of access to opportunity in this organisation.
Good, good progress, as you say. I think we need to approve this one. If anyone doesn't have any questions, I'll be happy to approve the report. Lovely, thank you. Here we are. Okay. So we're moving on to the finance and operational performance section, and Sue, I think you're happy, despite being virtual, still to give us an update on the FIC, Finance and Investment and Performance Committee report. Hand over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll keep my bit short because actually a lot of the content of that meeting is standing agenda items, and Mahboob's meeting in February will supersede what we spoke about at our meeting. So specific items that we covered that aren't in that general space relate to business cases largely, several of which have found their way to board or will be finding their way to board in their own right. So we received business cases relating to Windows 7, which was then updated in February. So I'll leave that for Mahboob to talk about. We received a paper about healthcare support workers banding, which we approved and which has therefore moved into being reflected in the accounts. And we received our regular procurement update, which is quarterly. The thing that I wanted to highlight specifically was the work on delivering social value through procurement and contracts, where the team are doing. Sorry, David's corrected me. I thought I said Windows 11. Maybe I didn't. I meant Windows 11. The work on social value, there's a huge piece of work going on to revisit and rework how we bring social value to the organisation. So how that reflects on our position as an anchor institution and how we support our charity. The work's not yet concluded, but it's really positive, and I think when it's finished will be a very innovative approach to using procurement to drive through our broader agendas. So I would bring that to the board's attention. We also received a report about the research that Matthew's talked about. So I don't think there's anything other than the social value I wanted to highlight, because I think the book can talk with the February update and all of the standing items, if that's okay, but always happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Should we take your bit, Mahboob, and then take questions on the entire report?
Yep, absolutely. I'll take it as read, so I won't repeat what's in the actual report itself, but draw out some points that from the report and also some of the discussion that took place as well. We, at a very high level, we became aware from information provided by a NEL ICB representative at our committee meeting, in that around 2023 we were in NEL ICB 2.5% funded above capita. We're now 2.1% funded below capita. That 4.6 difference is a £200 million movement, and therefore the 2.1% represents something like 100 million, which is equivalent to almost the overspends across NEL ICB. So it puts in a context of what pressures providers are under. Month 10 yielded some unexpected expenditure on non-pay, which we'll come into later and have a discussion around in private. We've been engaging constructively with the ICB and also NHS London to understand what sits behind that, the implications for this year and implications for next year as well. It is a very, underlining the point that Matthew made, it is a very, very busy time in our hospitals. Temporary staffing costs are higher than what we expected them to be for month 10. However, year on year, it's a £9 million reduction. Operational performance is good. Pleased to report that the investment has begun to have an impact on the gynae waiting list, something that the board was acutely concerned about several meetings ago. But in terms of long-term operational performance, to ensure it's sustainable, we do need to, I think, do things that was said earlier on in the meeting by Mark, is that think of transformation of services. Because what we're doing now is working really hard, and patients are using our services not necessarily is it sustainable with the level of activity that's increasing with reducing resources going forward. There. The interesting point to add to the section 137s within NEL is that because we've got lower unit costs for things like care facilities and particularly for housing as well, we import lots of vulnerable people and vulnerable young people from other parts of London. And that you might want to pick up in private as well. But the implications are not just for VHR, but also for the community and mental health providers and local government. And it is significant. The other thing is that we have invited colleagues from the ICB to come and talk with the committee around the mental health acute pathway and work being done to create one, and also the pressures that we're having as a consequence of those areas. And look forward to a sort of fruitful, collegiate and collaborative discussion around that theme. In terms of the EPR, this is my final comment before I stop on that, is that we have to put it in the context of it's not just EPR, it's digital investment, and it's a 2-decade catch-up in about 18 months. Not attempted before in the NHS. And consequently, the initial March 2025 start date was, in my view, and that's shared by David and Matthew and others, was highly aspirational. It was one set by Oracle around their operating timeframes. June was much more realistic, but knowing now that there are other challenges that we need to meet in the interim period, the new timeline that we've set for this is much more achievable and better. Because the underlying issue is that I'd rather us be delayed and go when we're ready, as opposed to rush into something and have more significant unintended consequences. Underline the point that Matthew made earlier, there will be some impact on operational performance, inevitably there is, but being as ready as possible is in the best interest of our patients. And obviously there are some financial implications to that, as well as some partnership relationship management with Barts.
Thank you. Any comments for Sue or indeed for Nabu, both elements of the timeframe? Taking the shoulders. Sounds like, I mean, there's such a lot. I know we're coming on to a number of items on the agenda, so there's no point going into detail on items that we know we're going to discuss later. A lot being carried and a lot been covered over those 2 meetings of that committee, so thank you very much. Really appreciate that. We'll see you later, Mark. Let's go on then to the month 10 integrated performance report. Yeah, let's get to see that.
Okay, so I won't rediscuss all of the metrics that we've already talked about to a certain extent during the meeting. But I will say to Ron that I want to reassure you that our ED performance is not an elephant in the room. There are many of us in that room on a regular basis, and I know that some of the things we've been doing over the past 12 months, and it's complex and it's busy, but some of the things we are doing are really aimed at improving that flow through the department. None of us accept anybody waiting in A&E for any number of hours for any type of decision making. So I hope that over the coming months we can do a little bit more around the edges of that performance metric to reassure you about some of the work that we do. So something I'll take away to make sure we get a bit more traction around how we communicate the work we're doing there. It feels a little sort of out of step really to say that we are the best ED provider in London on that basis, but it does go to show the context in which we're working, that a very, very busy environment with lots and lots of tensions within the health service generally. But our commitment is clear, and we will continue to both push for the redesign of the physical environment and recognise that the mixed model of healthcare, the way we provide assessment, is key to our improvement here. And just by way of explanation, briefly, we started just before Christmas trialling, working with our local GPs to help us with the initial assessment part of A&E department. That getting that decision maker in, and we agreed on Wednesday night, I think it was, or Tuesday night, that that's something we'll continue with. So getting the community in primary care into where we work, rather than trying to work out what should have been done and where, is a much more effective model of getting patients through a diagnostic process quickly. The second slide, our type 1, proves exactly what you're saying, Rob, that the patients that come to ED wait far too long, and the metrics around that are not good, and I accept that wholly. Just briefly on type 2, I just want to make the point. So type 2 is specialist A&E services, where the patient goes directly to the specialty and they provide a sort of mini A&E. And I just want to show that we've done a huge amount of work there around women and people with eye injury, but not only have we done a lot of work to improve that standard, it's evident that we've sustained that. It's not just a 1 month improvement. We've improved the work, we've maintained that level of access for patients. And I think that is testament to the, long and complicated journey we've created in A&E and UEC services generally. But I do want to commend the teams who've worked extremely hard to make a real difference for patients attending through those pathways. Moving on to ambulance activity, and we have improved our handover or receiving handovers from our London Ambulance colleagues. We've got a way to go on it being within 30 minutes, but the initial standard was 45. And we do work hard to do that, but occasionally, when it's very busy, when the department is full, and part of this goes to the rebuild argument, we don't actually have the physical space to allow patients to be handed over for want of crying. So ongoing work with that. We've got a good relationship with London Ambulance, and we made extra care to maintain a good relationship with them throughout the winter period this year by setting up a little regular touch point with them, just to make sure that people don't get too frayed. It's hard work, and it can get emotional when people feel they're not doing the best for patients. So I think I'm confident that we work well with LAS, and we'll continue to support in handing patients over. The next slide just talks about the average time of patients in the department, and we've talked about that already today, and the fact that we do need to strive harder to reduce that. And the next slide, again in green, 2 green bars on the graph around section 136, which I think is a conversation we've had many times, so I won't go through that again. And of course, we do provide a summary version of what each of our sites is doing, by way of how long people are staying in the hospital, and some of the areas of concern that we've talked about earlier, particularly around medically fit for discharge, delayed discharges, and how long patients have been in beds. And that's for information, but a nice summary version of what each of our site lead triumvirates are doing. Moving on to planned care. We've got always have good news stories around planned care. I'm very proud of the programme we've delivered since the end of the pandemic. And a real testament again to hard work, but to see the performance improving and the waiting list going down at the same time shows you this is good operational rigour, this is good performance, this is highly effective use of resources in that space. And so that is a trend not seen in every organisation in London, but certainly seen at VHIUT. So well done to everybody who contributes to that. And may I just add, I know the point has already been made, but the reason that is really improving is because of outpatient activity and not because we're doing loads and loads more surgery. And here's a bit of a myth that doing lots of surgery changes the waiting list, but it's actually respiratory and the other medical specialties that contribute to making a better service for planned care patients. Again, I think Mahbub stole my thunder on this one. The 52-week waits have reduced actually to 859. That is amazing. You can see the chart, you can see the improvement. A lot of those are women waiting for gynae care, but there are some other smaller specialties in there contributing to that. But focused vision, single objective is to reduce waiting times for everybody, and that's what the team are doing. And that is absolutely brilliant. This will give us everything we need to deliver the 1% target in the operational plan for 52 weeks as a percentage of our overall PTL. The inequality slide, I say this every month, but I do really want to highlight what it's supposed to be telling us rather than what it looks like, which is, you know, not a lot in there really, is there? So first of all, what that's showing, and it proves our case that gynae women's services have such a big backlog that women generally wait longer than men. Okay, so that's a statement of fact. I'm not going to add any more information to that. Secondly, bottom left, important to note that we regularly check the status of waiting for all patients with a learning disability on our PTL. In a PTL of 55,000 pathways, that's quite a big thing to do. And about 3 years ago, we added a special field onto our PTL to enable us at the click of a button to see all the patients on our waiting list with a learning disability flag. And then ensues a much more holistic conversation about how to treat people, how to get them into hospital, and what other services need to be wrapped around that. And I suppose what I wanted to highlight here particularly is that we are not disadvantaging patients with a learning disability. The waiting time is almost exactly the same, and that's good. That's a good thing to see, and it's a nice thing to show. It does show the kind of the more human side of our PCL management and RTT and plan care generally. I will move on to briefly just talk about our diagnostic services, which are compliant and have been compliant for a long time. Those services in red are, contributing to the 4.69% of underperformance, but the DMO1 target is an aggregate target, and therefore an organisation is only required to deliver an aggregate position in terms of performance. So within the realms of aggregate positions, we are compliant, and I'm happy with that. We do use the red RAG rated to give us a particular opportunity to talk further about those particular diagnostic areas, but essentially as an organisation, we're doing very well and continue to do well in that space. Theatre utilisation, again, I mean, Mike and I are going to be thinking about how we present the productivity and efficiency piece to the board in coming months, referencing where some of those inefficiencies have come from in terms of measurement, and that's the national piece that's given us some markers around what we're not doing as well as we could do. But theatre utilisation remains high in this organisation. We have a good model of care. I think it would be important for me to mention, though, that we do about 8% of our work, which we call backfill. But really what that means is we're using theatres that would otherwise be empty. And if we think about how that connects with our financial plan for next year, and if we reduce waiting list initiatives and extra flexible costs around extra theatre time, we may see a bit of a sea change there and actually start to have more fallow sessions, not using theatre time that isn't or doesn't have a team that's funded to work within it. So I will provide more information about that to you during the productivity and efficiency piece, but there is a real risk that we will stop using spare capacity due to lack of staff to run those theatres. Obviously, it's my job to make sure we don't do that, but it is a real risk if you don't fund flexible additional sessions. And then finally on cancer, we've got a lot to be proud of in cancer. There's always a lot to do, and 235 of the patients on our PTL of 4,600 are yet to have a diagnosis and a treatment plan. And that means that in the majority of cases, those are complex diagnostics. Majority of those patients, in fact, almost all of them will not have cancer, but it's our job to tidy up the end of that PTL and make sure we coordinate cancer investigations properly. So I will be continuing the focus on 62-day breaches and also the compliance with 62-day delivery in terms of services. And you can see the red rated services are the ones that we're going to be putting particular onus on going forward.
Very much. I picked it up in a number of the papers, and it's probably something everyone here knows and understands, but what on earth is the situation with all these gynecology long waits? And it's such a high proportion of all of our stats. So what are they waiting for, and why are they waiting so long?
Okay, so we've had, we've recently we've done a real deep dive at this board level in this meeting, so we're very happy to share that report.
Okay, it might be. I mean, if you prefer to take it offline and tell me separately, I'm happy to be educated.
There was a business case approved recently. It'll be useful for you to go through.
Yeah, I'll happily talk
It takes you through all the.
Okay, because I don't want to take up too much time. It's just it kept coming up.
Just for context, the whole of London, in fact, the whole of the country actually, after the pandemic, had significant backlogs for women's services in gynecology. And mainly because the entire PTL just stagnated during the pandemic. The recovery actions across the whole country vary from employing more gynecologists, opening women's health hubs, and then employing insourcing services to do more work, and that's what we're engaged with at the moment.
Thanks. Yeah, as usual, huge thanks for not only the detail within the report itself, but also for the way in which you actually present the information to help us understand it. I was just actually looking at that the chart on cancer, and the thing that struck me, which I'm struggling to get my head around, is when we look at the 31-day performance, we've only got one area, which is the skin cancers, which is in the red.
Yeah.
All the rest is in green. But then by the time we get to 62 days, we've got a whole lot of different ones that turn red. Logically, to me, it kind of doesn't make sense. So I'm just wondering if you can actually shed any light as to why it is when we're at 31 days, we're performing really well, and what happens at 62 days. It means we've got such a tail that we're not able to deliver on.
So it's very simple. So 31, it is very simple, and I hope I can explain it very quickly and very simply. So the 31-day target is connected to when you receive your diagnosis. So it's a subset within the 62-day pathway. So if you are told you have cancer, that becomes day 0, and we as an organisation have 31 days to commence treatment for you.
Okay.
If the 62-day pathway starts at the GP referral and ends at the day of treatment, and if within that we've got a longer wait for the diagnosis, so let's say you received a diagnosis within 40 days and your treatment within 31 days of the diagnosis, complied with 31 days, but you've not complied with 62. So it's a little window. So the importance of that standard actually is it takes away the noise of any other delays in finding out what's wrong with people, and asks an organisation, once you know somebody's got cancer, are you experiencing or delivering any delays in commencing treatment? So even if you've waited too long to find out what's wrong with somebody, you are still focusing on the most important thing, which is that cancer needs to be treated quickly and without delay. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah.
One of the things I noticed, and you highlighted it in the report around sleep studies, and that there seems to be a sudden increase in them, but you've obviously got a lot of thought into a multidisciplinary plan to deal with this. Could you just say a bit more about this, and perhaps perhaps Ruth has got some insight here about from primary care, because it's something I've noticed is upward trend.
So sleep studies predominantly are part of the workup for surgery. So it's part of the pre-assessment process. And we, as an organisation, undertake pre-assessment for our own patients. But we also provide the sleep study part of the pre-assessment for all of the private providers in BHR as well. We've always been a high deliverer of this service. So and it is, I have to say, Caroline, the biggest provider of sleep studies hospital I've ever worked in my entire career. But it's a risk assessment piece, and I think there is probably some clinical practice where we're doing more of those in a pre-assessment planning for surgery. And also, you know, we're doing more surgery, so you would do more sleep studies. The answer to the sleep studies is we're almost there now. We have purchased a piece of software which helps us to interpret the sleep studies quicker. We're the same as all the other organisations in London. It's called WatchPaps, and we're just going through the clinical safety case with our colleagues in IT to get that installed and working in the organisation. And that will probably, I mean, it will automate everything then. It will just basically get the report automated and out back to the GP or to the other organisation to undertake in the surgeries. It's not a highly specialist area. It just needs to be able to cope with the volume.
Ruth and then Ron. So to expand from that, it's partly because one of the new questions, well, no, it's just more widely used questions that come into pre-assessment. Questionnaire called Stop Bang, which is worth looking up. But essentially, any male on this table would probably reach the criteria to needing further assessment, because it's essentially, do you snore? Do you get tired?
Excuse me.
You get tired.
And a score of 3 will mean you need further assessment, never mind other things like have you got a higher BMI, are you treated for high blood pressure, which we know that there's an increase of. It doesn't mean that those people weren't around before, it just means we're more aware of them. And I think there needs to be a shift of assumption of sleep apnea rather than trying to prove it. And the other problem we have with some of our other providers, so I shouldn't name them, but some of the other providers is they will then consider anyone that is possibly sleep apnea comes off their list because they won't take anyone that is at slightly higher risk. And I'll say, oh, we have to have ITU available. Don't really. But that's also then putting pressure onto the trust, because the trust end up taking the more complicated, what's considered to be higher risk, and they're kind of creaming off what would be considered to be the lower risk patients, which gives the trust just more complexity, which feels a little bit unfair, especially when we're doing their assessment. It also creates a much longer pathway for the patients, because they'll get sent back to primary care to request the sleep studies. So that's one problem. We've now got a longer wait for the sleep studies, by which time their referral that went into that service to do the surgery has now lapsed. So we then have to put them back on the waiting list. And often with then your trust here, because they now won't accept them back. It's craziness from all levels.
Helpful.
Yeah, can I just come back to the care department? One of the things that interests me is we're doing quite well, I think, on meeting the statutory targets. Do we know how well we're doing on things like follow-ups and monitoring? Because some of the cancers, we discover cancer, then we decide that we're going to monitor it over a period of time. We say, okay, we'll monitor it every month for the next 6 months or whatever, or every 3 months or whatever. Do we actually have any statistics on actually how well we do against those targets to see people on time?
We do. So patients on active monitoring, they come from all sorts of disease groups, but for example, if you had went down a colorectal investigation process and we decided to do a colonoscopy every 6 months as a monitoring plan, we put that patient on another waiting list. It's called the non-RTT waiting list, but it's another waiting list that's not managed around 18 weeks. When your test is due, you automatically put your request for your colonoscopy goes onto our DMO1 waiting list as a request.
And so if we don't investigate you, you sit on the DMO waiting list until you've been investigated. So yeah, we do that. In some areas, follow-up is different. You know, oncology, post-chemotherapy is a manual process, and Hilary will know all about that. And so there's different, so there's cancer surveillance, which is keeping an eye on somebody. Then there's post-oncological treatment follow-up, which is slightly different. But the standards are very much focused on improving outcomes, which is getting people investigated, diagnosed and treated quicker. The metrics around the non-RTT waiting list, the DMO one around investigations, and then general follow-up within organisations is some kind of subject to certain other ways of monitoring.
Could we see some of that at some stage, please?
So, yeah, Hilary, and then we need to move.
So Ron, this has been a passion of mine. I'm a former oncologist and also a breast cancer survivor. The evidence that follow-up in oncology makes a difference to people's long-term survival is very scant. If you take breast cancer, there's been quite evidence going back 25, 30 years that actually the vast majority of women who relapse with breast cancer go back to their GP, even though they're under follow-up. So if we're looking at the financial context in the NHS at the moment, and we're also looking at, you know, rightly said, actually treating people who've just been diagnosed as quickly as possible and as effectively as possible is much more important than saying hello to a junior doctor every 6 months who frankly probably wouldn't even know if you'd relapsed. So I think the way we follow patients with cancer up is going to change quite dramatically over the next 5 to 10 years. If you just take colorectal screening, and I have a family history of colorectal cancer, so I've been through that for the last 20 plus years. We're now moving towards a point where NHS England is looking at a screening test for colorectal, of shifting the borderline at which you detect blood in the stools, which is actually probably more accurate than colonoscopy was 20 years ago, because it's so much more sensitive. But actually, if we move to what's called from fit at 120, which is the level at the moment, to fit at 80, we'll probably be able to pick up the vast majority of not only people who haven't yet been diagnosed with colorectal cancer, but people who are either having a second one or have got it coming back. And I think what we need to do is work much more effectively with the public so that they can be in charge of their own care, if you like, feel empowered to know what they should look for, when they should go back. And very often it's just the test that's needed. It's not to see the doctor or to go into the clinic. You know, the most important thing following a breast cancer patient, particularly if they have their disease picked up by a mammogram, is regular mammograms. You don't need to see the doctor for that. You can, you know, so I think this is a really fast moving area, and it would free up the capacity to get those 62-day waits down.
Thank you.
I'm not going to go on about that. What I would say is perhaps there's a piece of work to do is actually educate people so that they don't get fretful. You know, I was told I'd be seen in 3 months, it's now 5 months. There's an education thing there that we need to work on.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Right. I'm going to move on, thank you for that, to the financial position.
Thank you, Sarah. So, so month 10 has been a very, very difficult month. You'll see in the report that we have reported a 17.7 million deficit in a month. Now, there's 2 exceptional items in there that were planned for and expected. That adds up to 11.4 million. That's the year-to-date costs of the EPR that we were transferring out of capital into revenue. So the part of the provision that we're making for the band 2 to 3 pay assessment that we're agreeing. But other than that, there was a deficit of 6.3 million, which is a deterioration on the run rate that we've seen in the quarter before by about 5 million. That's down to less income, about 2.5 million. Pay costs have gone up by almost 1 million, and non-pay costs also went up by almost 2 million. So we've been having a good look into those. Various drivers of these income related to CDC activity and how we're commissioned for insulin pumps. Pay, we've seen, you'll see in appendix 2, I think it is, you'll see kind of, despite the fact we're doing well on agency, we are seeing an uptick in the last couple of months on cost, which is volume driven. I'm sure I'll come up in Janine's report in a moment. And then non-pay, which is a mixture of volume-based things and process-driven things. So we've had to have an assessment of what this means for the rest of the year, and we think it's like what it means is a likely outturn of 53 million, of which 20 is non-recurrent exceptional because that's the EPR and the pay settlement agreement. So that puts us in a space of about 33 for business as usual. Now things move forward. So last night we've been informed that of the 900 million that has been made available to the NHS recently, 45 million has come to North East London, and we're going to get 21 million. So that is a real help from a deficit position, but also from a cash position, because you'll know we've talked about cash on numerous occasions as a concern. So that will help to alleviate the cash pressures that we have. So we will need to submit the forecast in line with those numbers. So it was going to be a recommendation of 53, and it will be 32 off the back of the additional 21 being done. So we were notified of yesterday.
Does that play into the request we put in for cash?
So the cash that we have requested is kind of separate. We'll see who's talking to each other with it in the centre. We have received, so we asked for 28 million, and we had accrued income of 28 million essentially for ERF, but we were uncertain of timing. And given we had £1 million in the bank, we had to ask. We've received about 10 of the 28 that we for the ERF. That hasn't come through the loan application. We haven't heard back on the loan application yet. That will be in the coming days. We are hoping of the other 18 of accrued income to get 10. So it's feeling like cash is improving and to get us through to the end of the year.
Thank you. I know it's not been an easy month. Yes.
Can I just ask a question about the CDC performance? I don't understand what has happened there, and it would be really helpful to understand why that's happened and going forward, what can we do to meet the threshold so we don't end up in this position again? If somebody would explain to me, that would be really helpful.
I'll happily explain that to you, Marta. So I think first of all, what happened was that the NHS changed the formula by which they gave us income for that work. So it was previously an agreement to fund at income levels on an aggregate number. So as long as you were delivering a percentage of the activity you said you would do on aggregate, you were still going to get paid for the work you did in the CDC. That was changed the month before month 10, and they recalculated it all, and that took nearly £1 million out of our income forecast, which we hadn't previously known wouldn't arrive. So there's a sort of formula issue here around income allocation, which we didn't know about.
So that was in year?
That was just done at month 10 by the national team. Okay, so we've previously been working on the basis that you deliver the percentage of work you said you would do across the board, they would honour the income for the services. And then they changed that in month 10, and that just took an 860,000 out of that. The second thing to remember is that because, for example, St George's opened later than expected, out of our control, but in terms of project management, it opened later. And Barking, there were a couple of areas where we couldn't set up services as quickly as we could do, for example, with Cytosponge and some of the endoscopy services. There was a national pause on delivering some of those while they sorted out service specifications. So there were a number of competing things happening in the CDC, but we were reasonably confident we would still get paid because the funding formula worked in that way. And then that changed. So that's the reason. The answer to that, Marta, is that I have strengthened a bit more wrapped around operational rigour around, are we going to deliver the numbers of activity we said we're going to do or not? If we're not going to, we will strip out the investment that we made in those services in lieu of not delivering the income. But personally, the onus really is on the services to expand, increase the activity that they're doing in the CDC in lieu of the income targets. There is a third piece, which is that we need to try and get bit closer in the commissioned arena, because, for example, at Barking, there's a GP direct access MRI scanner on the same site as the MRI scanner that the CDC has. And so we've got kind of too many people on the same place. We just need to have one MRI scanner doing work for the community, not two MRI scanners, one of them run by us and another run on behalf of the GPs for doing sort of the same population but for different reasons. So there's a little bit of consolidation required in the imaging arena for now, which I think is work ongoing.
Thank you.
Did we each know we were putting an MRI scanner in the same building?
We did. Yeah. It's not in the building, it's a mobile. And I think the commissioning of GP direct access services and the CDC is slightly out of kilter, let's call it that. I think there's some work to be done in that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Good. Okay. Right. Did you want to just come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention a huge thanks to Sue for chairing FIC. This is the second time that she stepped up to chair FIC in the last couple of years, and she chaired it in the last 6 months really, really well indeed. And as soon as I came into the chair, the financial issues, challenges became apparent in month 10. So that's my responsibility. At Sue being in the chair, who knows if month 10 was completely different on that. But seriously, thank you very much, Sue, indeed, on behalf of myself and the colleagues.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Right, let's move on to corporate governance, and it is Sue indeed. So the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee report. Over to you, Sue.
Okay. Sorry, you caught me askance. I thought you were going to go to workforce next, but we've skipped it. Okay.
That's entirely my mistake. I'm sorry. So sorry.
That's all right. Shall I go away and come back again later?
Should have nudged me. I'm absolutely rubbish at this job. Over to Janine.
I'll be brief, Chair. Essentially, what this boils down to is that good news is that our substantive workforce has been growing, which is good for our people, good for our patients, and people in our operating systems. The bad news is that our temporary workforce has been growing. And so that is a circle that we cannot square at this point. And as you'll see from the report, we know where the areas are. So Catherine's already mentioned the realities of corridor care and mental health nursing and the cost that is associated with that. And Fiona's already talked a little bit about the medical side of things as well. And so what's apparent when we look at some of the drivers of this additional cost is that we have failed in the delivery of our anticipated medical savings in terms of driving out premium waste. And where we are delivering savings, a lot of that is largely being driven by corporate exceeding the savings targets that were set at the start of the year. And we know that we've had to take some quite tough decisions this month in order to get a grip on that run rate, including hard decisions around therapies and temporary staffing there.
Thank you. Okay, sorry. Thank you. I can only just anecdotally, in terms of the progress we've made on recruitment, so that we went on a little visit before to ITU, and it is only anecdotal, but lovely to hear that a couple of years ago there was something like a 37% vacancy rate in ITU, and having brought the critical care and ITU and surgery and anaesthetics together, both sides of the house are now at sort of below 10% in terms of vacancy rate. So not only recruiting to fill the vacancies, but also the retention really good. So there's some real positives in there, which is lovely. And I think that says a lot about how people feel cared for and supported, as much as the other initiatives. But those are things that make people choose to come and choose to stay, actually, isn't it? So and some homegrown people as well who have been HCAs who are now qualified nurses. So just fabulous to see that. And I know it's a little bit anecdotal, but value. Any other comments on?
That's the only other comment on that, if I may, Chair, is that Mike, myself and Alan have had conversations around how we can sort of just tweak and tighten up the governance and reporting arrangements of in-month spend on non-permanent staff, so that there's sort of more robust oversight on it. You know, we are below the national NHS target, but we know if people are going to get challenged.
Right. Thank you, Janine. And now I think it is time to move on. Sorry, Sue, for bringing you in a little early. The Audit and Risk Assurance Committee.
Thank you, Chair. We'll take the report as read. There's 4 items that I wanted to highlight. Firstly, progress on the external audit, which we will come to later on in this meeting, but just to commend the extraordinary work that Mike, his team, in particular Chris Randall, have been doing to rework our capital accounting, and to thank our auditors who have been working diligently and very supportively to help us to drive this forward. We have made progress. We're not quite there yet, but Mike will give an up-to-date report when we get to the report and accounts item on the agenda. To highlight a couple of specific items of work, we've commissioned a gentleman called Rob Corral to do some work with us on looking at risk. That work is ongoing, and we will shortly be seeing the first executive risk group chaired by Matthew starting in April, and I think that's going to be a real step change for our approach towards risk and how we document and manage risk, and I think that will start to give us stronger and stronger assurances. As a committee, we're still not quite there with our positioning around historic risk, for instance, but I do think the piece of work that Rob is supporting us with will drive that forward, so I'm feeling positive about that. And that work will also include looking as a board at risk appetite, and we've got a workshop coming up soon for that. So again, I think that's really going to help us get our heads around all of this and move it forward very positively. And of course, as an organisation, we align our BAF with our organisational objectives and our annual plan. So this is the time of year where we revisit all of that. So it's a great opportunity to start with a clean slate and move everything forward. So just to commend that piece of work. In a similar vein, the work that Linda and her team have been doing on implementing the Declare system for managing our conflicts of interest. This is really good work, and last night Linda told me, I can't remember the exact number, but we've now got over 60% of folk who should have declared at this stage having completed. That means we're starting to get ahead of where we were pre-automation. So best ever position and can only get better from here on in. So big thank you to Linda and her team for driving that forward. It's not easy because it's not sexy, exciting stuff, but they've really persevered and pushed hard on this, and you know, well done. And the other thing, just to highlight, because it's coming to the board for decision, we've also revised our terms of reference to reflect the connectivity with other committees and how we gain our assurances from other committees, but also to move a couple of digital cyber items from FIC into audit committee, one to help with the overload of work in FIC, but also because they are largely assurance, risk compliance and management pieces, so they sit nicely within the audit committee. So any minute now, Linda will be, I think, asking for your approval of our revised terms of reference for that. I think those are the things I wanted to highlight. The rest of the report is there for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Are there any questions for Sue? No.
Oh, sorry, just one quick question. Thanks very much. On the Declare system, is it possible to actually see by department or by area of operations how people are actually completing that, because I mean, and are we looking at the highest risk areas? I mean, for example, there's more potential for companies in procurement than there is in other parts of the business. So are we able to see that, and are we able to focus on those high risk areas?
So the answer is yes, Martha. We can drill down by department, and so we can draw on those stats, and that is the plan. The drive at the moment has been to get the decision makers who mandatorily are required to declare every year to push on comms. It's been on that, but yes, so we're going to be adapting our comms as we and our engagement with colleagues as we have returns and we see the status on that. So yes, is the answer to that in simple terms. And we will be bringing more information to different forums, including Trust Executive Committee and to Audit Committee, etc. on that as we progress.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we are being asked to approve the change to the terms of reference as Sue described in terms of board information and reporting coming from the other committees to the Audit and Risk Committee, and also those items that are transferring in from FIC and more moving to FIC rather. So are we comfortable and happy to approve those changes to the terms of reference? Yes. Yep. And then the other item is to ratify the use of the trust seal, for which there were 4 trust uses of the trust seal over the last few months, which are detailed in the papers. I don't think I need to read through all of those, but again, happy to ratify those. Thank you. Okay, good. That brings us on to the great news about the annual report and accounts from last year. Finally.
Yeah, so hopefully we are at the end of a long journey to close the 23-24 account. So there are probably for your benefit more than others. We've been grappling with an issue which goes back to 2010 when the accounting for PFI has changed. Our managed equipment service here is embedded in our PFI. So we've had to go back and work through 15 or 16 years of contracts and hundreds of variations, and that's why it's been a very protracted process, but we feel like we're nearly there. So the ask of the board today is to approve the annual report and accounts that are in front of you, but noting there are some relatively minor amendments to be made as the auditors go through their final checks this week. We had hoped to have email confirmation of the opinion by now, but they haven't quite managed to give us that. We fully are expecting an unqualified opinion on the account. The changes that we will be making to the account is just to and the annual report, to update the annual report for the membership of the board. There's been quite a lot of change. You'll recognise from the accounting period that we're signing off. And then in the annual accounts themselves, there's a note which is the prior period adjustments, which is note 34, but that basically explains all of the changes that have had to happen to the accounts, correcting past balances and getting this year or 23-24 balances correct. That note will not impact the 4 statements of 23-24, so it won't impact the balances on the statement of comprehensive income or the statement of financial position, the INE and the balance sheet kind of language. But what we will see is some relatively minor changes to balances of comparator kind of prior years. So we're expecting to see the INE move by about £200,000 in 22-23, and the balance sheet by about nearly 900,000 in 21-22. So other than that, we're not expecting things to happen. So all minor in the context of the £950 million organisation. So the ask would be that we can approve the accounts, but at the same time request that we have a delegation of authority to the audit committee to meet and sign off those amendments. The hope would be that we can do that tomorrow, and then we can get signatures and submissions by the end of the week. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, thank you. And it's been a lot of work, and I guess it's tidying up so that what it says is accurate in terms of who was on the board at material times, but who's now on the board for signing off. And it's I can appreciate that. A bit complicated in terms of getting the timing right and where people were sitting at different stages. But yes, and I know Sue and Mahbub are happy to support in terms of that sign off. If we need to delegate or would it be to do that tomorrow? Ron, you had a comment.
Thank you. Just, I mean, we're talking about media affairs here, and I'm going on about something that's quite significant. But in membership of the board, I noticed in that report, there is no mention whatsoever of having a patron partner on the board. I'm not too sure what the status of my position on this board is. It's all varied over time. We've got a bit sort of lost and changed. Originally, I was asked if I would like to join the board as a non-voting member, but not be here as part two, which was going to be worked on over a period of time. But then things sort of got lost and changed. And in that annual report, there is no mention of a patient partner. But the original intention was that the chair of the Patient Partnership Council would have a position on the trust board to represent patients. But we seem to have got lost a little bit. Can I just ask that we can tidy that up somewhere along the line and formalise the position?
To reflect that you attend and you participate in the way that you do. I mean, obviously, it's not a voting member of the board, and there are a number of people who attend who are not voting members, but we still recognise their involvement. So,
Chair, I suggest that we can put that amendment into the report that Ron has attended, that the role has attended, because obviously when we join, we can make that amendment, as we have made some amendments in that section. Mike, I think the auditors will be fine with that. Yeah, I can make that amendment this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Indeed, of the board.
I think that's fine.
Originally, there was going to be discussion about whether you was going to have a patient representative in the black hole that is part two, as much as anything else. And I understand the sensitivities about all of that, but from the public's perception, there's no patient representation in that, and it's sort of almost a secret society, and a lot of suspicion about it. And really, I think we ought to work on actually trying to dispel some of that. You.
I suggest we might take that one offline rather than resolve here, because I think that's something that requires further discussion.
You might want to discuss it in part two, I don't know. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Helpful. Okay, so are we happy to approve, as recommended, the report and accounts with those waiting for final written sign off, and the assumption that what we get from the auditors is as you have suggested, which will be an unqualified, then we're comfortable to delegate that to the subset, the audit committee. Thank you very much. Good. And Sue and Mahbub, thank you very much for being on standby to help with that. Much appreciated and helps us get through. And of course, if that all goes to plan, then we have planned a short AGM on the 27th of March, which will be virtual, and we will publicise that appropriately, but we won't be able to do that too soon until we know we're definitely able to go ahead. But key people have got it in their diaries, so thank you. Right, we're nearly there. We're going on to the board assurance framework. May I hand over to
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. So you've got the board assurance framework for position for the end of February and the forecast position for the end of March. We continue to have oversight in the board committees of the BAF risks. I think the key points really are that as we get to the end of the year, the risks which we've reduced in score during the year related to digital, planned care and estates, and with planned care risk having achieved its target score in February, and estates forecasting that they'll achieve their target scores by reducing the number of extreme and high level risks by the end of the financial year, so imminently. The financial sustainability risk did increase in score during Q1 from 16 to 20, and has continued to track at that level throughout the year. The risk relating to a diverse and inclusive workplace and the inequalities risk in discussion in a number of committee forums at the People and Culture Committee and also in the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee. It was felt that in the context of the other risk scoring on the board assurance framework, that there needed to be some moderation of that. So I know Jadine wants to flag that whilst those scores have reduced as a result of that moderation, that's because of moderation as opposed to potentially
mitigations in those areas. So just wanted to flag that. And that's something that the Matthews new risk group will absolutely be looking at in terms of moderating risk on a monthly basis. Give us that opportunity, which will be a great help. The next steps will be to refresh the BAF. So as we approve the goals and deliverables for next year, the BAF framework will be refreshed again, revisited. We will obviously be introducing the risk appetite into that ready. So that those were the main points that I wanted to flag at this point. Exec leads can obviously answer any questions in relation to the detail within the BAF on their risks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Huge amount of detail and fascinating to get into for my first exposure to the BAF. But it actually reads well in terms of setup, and I think the risk work that we've talked about will be helpful in terms of getting to grips with that and how we take it forward into next year. Are there any comments or questions in relation to the current BAF? Oh. Perfect. I also didn't have any particular questions. That was a really helpful read, so thank you. Really good. So we don't need to prove anything. We're just being. So we're doing quite well on time. We're getting into any other business. Do we have anything anyone wants to raise in this forum? Any other business? Meeting effectiveness. Well, personally, I found it really useful. Ever such a lot of papers, but thank you for all those who contributed papers for getting them in on time. I know we had the annual accounts, we knew that was going to come in late, but to have a full pack in one delivery of all the papers, really helpful. So I really appreciate. I know that's not always easy, but it was an ask last time, and it's been followed through already. So I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Good flow of the meeting. Yes, Hilary.
Well, just on that point, I found it really helpful because you see the BAF in various iterations with QAC or other committees, but actually the way it's set out so that you know, if you read the first 22 pages, you've covered the vast majority of it. And if you want more detail, it's there.
Yeah.
But I didn't at least feel obliged to read all 60 plus.
I'll confess I did, because I felt I read the first time around, but I'll take your advice going forward. Thank you very much. Right. Thank you very much. And now questions from the public. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Chair. Firstly, I've got one brief question, and I might allow a second question as well. The first one is the BBC reporting the Medway Hospital was suffering from overcrowding so badly that nursing staff were having to tell patients to saw themselves. They just couldn't cope. We've all heard that you've just had your busiest month ever. So I can't be the only one that's concerned that the same thing may be happening in Georgia Queens. Can I have some assurance that that's not happening in
Yes, Catherine.
Thank you. Yes, I think it was an appalling read, actually. I think it was really, really sad for those patients. But what we do in our corridors is we take people out of the corridors and into a cubicle we have specifically available to undertake any personal care. So if you're in the corridor and you need to use the commode or you need to be washed, we will take you out of the corridor into the cubicle that is specifically available for that. We've got 2 or 3 of those cubicles available. We will have your personal care and then you come back out into the corridor. We don't have people on commodes or anything.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's good to hear. And I have to say, I've been and visited the EDs in both and seen exactly how that's carried out, and then seen people on their way to and from those personal care visits, and then it is comfortable as it can be in the circumstances. Obviously not ideal, but I did see that level of care and was reassured, I have to say.
It is quite time consuming, obviously, but that's how much.
And I think importantly that we've had, I mean, all of us have probably walked around the corridors at some point, but also the patient feedback is actually that they feel really well cared for. They very much appreciate the pressures on the system and absolutely appreciate this is not where they like to be in a corridor, but from a nursing care point of view, feel really well looked after and don't have any complaints about it. Which is obviously positive and I think very reflective of the wonderful nursing care that is there. Rob?
Yeah, as a patient representative, I spend a lot of time in the corridors and a lot of time talking to patients. And let me assure you from the patient's point of view, and as a patient representative, the people in our corridors, whilst they would rather not be in the corridors, the one thing that is almost unanimous is the level of praise for the people that are caring for them, and the way that we try to maintain dignity as much as we can, and that comes from the patients. So thank you for the question.
Second.
Oh, yes, thank you, Chair. Terrible care at Mid-Staff years ago. Great report by Francis, big stress on public engagement. I have to say that there was a change in standing orders here years ago that meant written notice, 4 days written notice is required questions. Since Mid-Staffs, there's been countless scandals. Every so often, it's very rare that full-time professional staff miss something, but every so often, and it is rare of course, a member of the public says something of real importance. So I'm suggesting that you reflect upon my point and consider going back to the system that you had before, which was no notice. Anyone could pitch up. They might have had a bad experience that morning and they wanted to share it with you, and it could be an important experience. They could do that. But really think there may be some awkward people turning up if you don't have without notice questions. But the plus side is they have better scrutiny. So I only ask you to reflect upon changing the system. It's just me. And I've got my hobby horses, and other people should have let other people speak at this meeting apart from just me.
Thank you. I might hand over to Matthew and Rooney, but I think it's a fair point and maybe one for us to consider, but this isn't the only way that people can provide feedback into the organisation. And there are many other routes and there's many other forms of engagement with patients, with the community. And of course, there's a complaints service and there's the PALS service and the pay. So there are a variety of ways in which patients do provide feedback on a regular basis in the moment. And after they've had time to reflect, if they've not been satisfied with their service, or indeed if they've got general questions, and they email us and we receive comments and questions, and they are all replied to. There are requirements to respond in a time frame, first of all to acknowledge and then to respond if people do make contact. So I don't think attending the board meeting is the only way by any means for people to raise concerns or ask questions. And it isn't a greater way of getting that attention. But
yeah, I mean, I think, I know on a number of occasions, Andy, when you wanted to ask a supplementary question, I think Jackie, by and large, let that happen. I think we need to kind of see how this develops. There are many, many ways, as the chair said, that people ask us questions. The questions at the board are a fraction of the overall volume of questions we get about the way we run our business. I mean, I think this is a kind of, should the demand arise, we'll meet it as and when it's there, really. But I think you're right about Francis, so it's very clear about the transparency, and I hope that the way we're conducting things now with the online access, etc., is a sign that we're really keen to have people participate as much as possible.
yeah, maybe one thing we might look into, I don't know if anyone's ever asked to attend outside of that, or within that 4-day window and been told they weren't able to attend. So I'm not sure that the 4-day requirement in and of itself is a barrier for people attending if they wanted to attend the public board meetings.
I just add that the 4-day thing is more about submission of a question rather than attend. I mean, you could rock up with a minute's notice.
Yeah.
Just the limitation.
So the question.
Andy, the point I'd make is that we actively promote the meetings, and as you have done now, as you have experienced now, Andy, over many, many years, questions have been allowed that have not been submitted 4 days in advance.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. but you're right, transparency and access and the ability to ask questions, raise concerns is absolutely fundamental to the NHS, and I don't think there's any question that as a trust and as a board we're open to that. But thank you. Good. I think we might be at the end of the meeting. Thank you very much. So we're going to take a short break. Obviously, public representatives, those who are not members of the board, can now leave, and we'll move into private session, and we're starting at 3:15. Thank you very much.